Hello, everyone. It is great seeing so many people here. Welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Laura, and I'm part of the development team here at CVT. And I'm really honored to be the first to welcome you to today's discussion, where we're going to be doing all we can to share with you information that we know about what has been happening with CVT's programming over the past 2 weeks and really answer your questions as well. That's something that is very important to us as an organization, is being as transparent as we possibly can with our community of supporters. So thank you for taking an hour to be with us today. And one thing I do want to mention is for questions, you'll notice on the bottom of your screen there's a little box that says Q&A, and we would love for everyone to use that function for asking questions. We have several hundred people on this call today, and we know that there's a lot of questions that our community has, and we want to answer as many as we possibly can. So by using the Q&A function, if we're not able to answer your question live, we'll have a record of that, and then we can get back to you with an answer just as soon as we can. So again, thank you for being here. Really, really honored that you're spending time with us today. So I am joined by Simon Adams, our president and CEO, as well as Emily Hutchinson, our Vice President of Global Programs, and Fawn Bernhardt Norvell, our Vice President of Advancement. So between this small group of us, we will do everything we can to share with you everything we know at this point. So to start us off, Simon, why don't you kick us off with kind of an update, what's been happening these past 17, 18 days? And
Yeah,
just, yeah, bring everyone up to speed.
thanks for that, Laura. I really appreciate it and welcome everybody. And I wish we were meeting under happier circumstances. And before I begin, I also just want to acknowledge that there are quite a few CVT staff who have actually joined this call, and also including quite a few of our staff who have been furloughed over the last 18 days since this crisis sort of began. So, as many of you will know, CVT for 40 years this year has supported torture survivors and other survivors of conflict-related trauma around the world. And those who come to us, um, they come to us because quite often they've suffered unspeakable horrors and lost everything because they opposed tyranny, because they opposed injustice, and thousands of them pass through our doors every year. And let me also just mention, as we kind of get into this, that our financial year begins each year on the 1st of October. And in the 4 months prior to the 20th of January, we were having a great year. We had been immensely successful with grant proposals and fundraising. We'd spent 3 years carrying out kind of restructuring and reforms to make ourselves more efficient and effective. We had new programs here in the United States. We had new programs overseas. We were running a balanced budget. Fast forward 18 days, well, 18 days since the 24th of January, I guess, and everything is under threat. On the evening of Friday, the 24th of January, we were informed by the US State Department and by USAID that, in keeping with President Trump's executive orders, we were required to immediately stop work on the vast majority of our international healing programs in Africa and the Middle East. And days later, actions by the government suggested that some of our healing programs in the United States might also be at risk, those that were connected to some federal funding. So this was a devastating blow, to say the very least. And in a matter of hours, and this is something maybe Emily will talk about a little bit later, in a matter of hours, our staff had to communicate with clients. They had to let them know that their care was ending prematurely. We also had to talk to staff about shutting down projects that they'd worked on for years. And clients, staff, myself, we were all heartbroken. And just so you have some context of the size of what we're talking about, CVT's work outside the United States comprises about three-quarters of our budget, our annual budget of $36 million. And through that budget, we extend rehabilitative care to refugees and displaced people living in Ethiopia, in Iraq, in Jordan, in Kenya, in Uganda, and of course, here in the United States as well. And we provide training and resilience and skills building work also for human rights defenders and humanitarian workers. And so the people who are impacted the most by these stop work orders are the people who are actually some of the most vulnerable populations in the world and have already suffered unimaginable horrors at the hands of some of the world's worst human rights abusers. Like, look at the people who come to our clinics in Jordan. Most of them are uh, people who have fled from the former Assad regime in Syria. And no matter where you look, you see this. In Ethiopia, we see people from Eritrea, a country that's been described as the North Korea of Africa. Also displaced civilians from the recent civil war in Ethiopia. People from South Sudan, people from Venezuela, people who have fled all kinds of conflict and dictatorship, as I said, in different parts of the world. And we were also forced, and I want to underline and put that in bold, forced to place about 75% of our colleagues on furlough. And this includes staff who have built their careers with us, who have years and years of experience and faithful service to our mission and mandate. Um, and also, and I want to just mention this as well, also including people who are former refugees themselves and who served survivors from dictatorships that they themselves fled from. And the survivors who come to us and seek support from CVT come with these kind of complex and deep experiences of trauma. Some of these are people, and I wrote about this the other day. Some of these are people who have been imprisoned and tortured themselves. Some have survived persecution and atrocities. Some have seen their loved ones taken from their home in the dead of night and disappeared, never to return again. And some of them are children. Children. I was in Ethiopia at the end of last year in a refugee camp called Wanyil, which is on the border with South Sudan. We have a children's group there. And I was there in the morning and I was just talking to some of the kids. These are young boys. It was a boys group, somewhere between like 12, 10 and 14 years of age, maybe a couple of them. And they were having a cup of tea. I'm always a sucker for a cup of tea in the morning, so I had a cup of tea with them. And I said to one of them, "Oh, is this why you come to CVT for the tea?" And he just kind of laughed. Lame joke, but he laughed. It was kind of it. And I said to one of the other boys, why do you come to CVT? And he said, "I want to live." These are children who have experienced war and things that no adult should ever have to experience, let alone any child. In 2023, our clients came from 69 different countries around the world. In Ethiopia alone, we cared for about 6,500 survivors and family members. That same year, our 500 staff around the world cared for nearly 18,000 survivors and their family members at the various locations. And that healing is sometimes literally life-saving. So at one of our international projects, there was a survey that showed 25% of new clients who come to CVT because they're struggling with suicidal thoughts. This week, in the past 2 weeks, our counselors have had incredibly difficult discussions with people about halting these programs. And, this was a quote that came to me and I used in something that I wrote. This one survivor said, CVT has so enlivened me. It has saved me from hurting or killing myself. I'm worried about how many people may commit suicide because of not coming to CVT. And so all of those kind of conversations that we've all had have just been profoundly sad, profoundly sad. But in the darkness of what we're kind of experiencing at the moment, I'm also trying to always look at the positives and look at the glimmers of light, and one of the pieces of feedback I got was from that refugee camp Wenyil near Gambela in Ethiopia, where some of the refugees and survivors who we treat there told counselors that they were worried about the counselors and that they hope that they will all be able to meet again and continue one day. These are people who absolutely refuse to let hope die, no matter how dire their circumstances are. And there was this wonderful story, and I apologize if anyone here has heard me tell it. A woman in Winyil who came to one of the group sessions and had been told it had to be closed down now because of the stop work orders. She had fled her home in South Sudan during the civil war. She had lost absolutely everything. She had lost her family members. She had lost her home. She had lost her farm. She lost everything. She came to the camp with nothing. After a year of therapy, she said it enabled her to recover and rebuild her life. And so 1 year later, she had a job, she had a bicycle, and she had a goat. And because of that, and because of the progress that she could see, she said, I know I'm going to be okay now. I know I'm going to be okay. But I hope that CVT and I hope that these teams will be okay. And in Gambala, the same area that I've been talking about, that group that I mentioned earlier of those young boys, that was closed down. And in that closed down process, the counselors tried to remind these kids of everything they'd learned and everything that coping mechanisms they'd been given. And, the children spoke about their experiences of war, of therapy, of the progress they've made, and that they had learned the importance of looking out for each other. And I think that's true. I think they will. But there's just so many sad stories that we've all had to hear over the last 18 days and that I could share with you. But let me just say this instead. This is not the start to a 40th anniversary year that any of us wanted, any of us. Um, but we will endure and we will rebuild out of this. Our work is needed now more than ever. I firmly believe that because torture survivors still deserve a pathway to healing and hope and not closed doors. And that's why I want to end this kind of talk with a personal plea to every single one of you who's watching and listening today, which is no matter what happens next, I know that CVT will survive. They may well choke off all our federal funding. We will be smaller than we were on Friday, the 24th of January, but we are resilient. We are a resilient organization. And even if you take away every federal dollar, we're still an $8 to $10 million a year organization. That's still a big organization. That's still an organization which can have a real impact on people's lives and can be a life-changing organization for people who are desperate and vulnerable. And please remember, even after this whole funding situation, we still have programs in Minnesota, in Georgia, in Washington, D.C., down in Arizona on the US southern border. We still have our new Tactics in Human Rights program in the Middle East. We still have a small program in Kenya, and we still have a tiny program in Thailand and Burma. These are programs that did not receive US federal funding, and so it or only received a tiny bit of federal funding, and it can't be taken away. But it's going to take, by our calculation, an extra $1.3 million to get us through the next 90 days, the 90 days of this alleged review. that supposed review that we're going through. Um, and you've probably seen the emails that have been sent out to perhaps to some of you about this. What I can tell you, and Fawn was going to speak to this more, is that the response from our supporters has just been extraordinary, extraordinary generosity. And so I want to leave you with this thought, which keeps coming back to me at the moment. It's originally from Mexico, but I'll say it not in Spanish, I'll say it in English. And it's this: they tried to bury us, they didn't know we were seeds. I'm not afraid of what comes next. I know we can do this. We're not laying down, we're not giving up. And I hope that we can count on you being beside us for this next really difficult part of the journey. So thank you again for coming today and listening. And now I'm going to invite Emily Hutchinson, who's our Vice President of Global Programs, to talk a little bit more about how some of this played out at an operational level.
Thanks, Simon. And thanks everyone who is here for your interest in what's happening, and for your support of CVT, your ongoing support of CVT. It's greatly appreciated. Um, yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means to close programs. It might sound simple and it's not. But first, I just want to say, um, so our programming globally was our programming outside of the US was virtually halted. So that is our direct services programming supporting survivors. That is our capacity development programming supporting human rights defenders, and our justice and accountability programming supporting those who are seeking justice for the things that they have experienced. So that is about 16 total programs serving tens of thousands of people. And everything was ground to a halt in a matter of about 2 days as we received the various stop work orders from the U.S. government. So it's had a devastating impact on our work outside of the United States and on our staff and of course on our clients. So what does it mean to stop work on the ground? I'm going to use just one example to highlight sort of how challenging this is. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our Ethiopia programs. And first, I'll just say that typically when we close a program, there are months and months of planning that go into how to do so in the most ethical and sensitive and trauma-informed way, right? And then there's several months usually of program closure. We don't do it in a very short time span. So that would typically be the way that we approach program closure. That's not the way that we were able to do that this time. And there is absolutely no one from myself to anyone else in our program teams who wanted to do that this way. We were forced to do this by the US government and the demands that they placed on us. So just to give an example, our Ethiopia program is actually 9 separate locations all across the country. In fiscal year 2024, those offices connected with and supported about 50,000 people, whether through intensive services, community outreach programs, and other, psychosocial support activities. So it's a huge operation. The team had 1 week to shut everything down. That means doing things like determining what to do with our facilities, what to do with our offices, what to do with our assets, and most importantly, how to communicate with clients and how to do so in a way that is as ethical and trauma informed as is possible in a context that is inherently unethical. And that was, again, something that was placed on us, not something that we chose to do. So our 284 staff working on our Ethiopia programs did an unbelievable job of connecting with our clients, across all of those locations in just a matter of 1 week. And Simon shared a little bit about just some of the clients' reactions to the news that we were no longer going to be able to support CVT. There was gratitude and also deep, deep sadness and concern. It is, and it is very difficult for us, and of course for our clients, to be experiencing what they're experiencing after, as Simon already said, all of the other things they've already experienced. Our staff in Ethiopia the bulk of them are national professionals, Ethiopian professionals some of whom have been working for CVT for 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years. And they're an incredible group of people. They worked incredibly hard to bring meaningful closure to clients in a very challenging circumstance. I think I'll just close by offering a story of resilience, since Simon did the same. And it also comes from Ethiopia. And I'm not going to make it through this without crying. So 3 days after we received the stop work order, several of our colleagues in Ethiopia came together and formed a local nonprofit organization called the Organization for Resilience and Community Empowerment. And they are determined to continue the work of CVT, to continue providing life-changing and life-saving care to survivors of torture and war trauma. And despite these massive setbacks that they've experienced now, this is what they've chosen to do. And I could not be more proud to count them among my colleagues. And I'm thrilled to learn about, the work that they're going to be doing. So as Simon said, we are seeds, and in this case, they're seeds that grew back really quickly. And I think that speaks to the resilience of our staff, and ultimately of the organization. Thank you. Laura, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Emily. So we are getting a lot of questions coming in, and I really appreciate that. And we're gonna kind of switch to answering your questions now. And one thing I do just want to say is we are committed to being as transparent as we possibly can. And there are still going to be some questions that we don't have answers to. So please bear with us as we are responding as rapidly as we can. And I appreciate your understanding if there are just some things that we aren't able to give an answer to at this point. But I'm going to invite Emily, Simon, and Fawn to come back on camera. And we have a lot of questions kind of with a similar tone. So Simon, I guess a lot of the questions we are getting right now is what does rebuilding look like? What are we prioritizing? To the extent that you can answer right now, what is CVT going to look like on day 91 after this 90-day review?
Thanks for that, Laura, and thanks for the question. I can't speak about, I mean, as I said, what is remaining, 75% is being put on pause, suspension, whatever. What is remaining is obviously our absolute priority. And we want to not just strengthen those programs, we want to build out of those programs. Beyond that, I think it's still so incredibly early and it's very difficult to kind of I think it would be foolish for me to make kind of broad, sweeping statements, except to say this: we want to help, as we always have, the greatest number of people we possibly can in the world. And I think one of the things that CVT has always done well is to look for the strategic opportunities to have maximum impact. And, while I was off camera, I had a quick scan of some of those questions. And let me just address one other issue because it's very close to my own heart, which is that, for 40 years, going all the way back to President Ronald Reagan, we've had this area has had support from Republican administrations, it's had support from Democrat administrations. And support for torture survivors should not be a partisan issue. It should always be a bipartisan issue. It's a deep moral question. But I also want to talk a little tiny bit, if I could, because there's been so much in the public discourse about generosity and about foreign aid. And I'm one of those people who has worked in this sector for the majority of my life, and I've worked in refugee camps and conflict zones where you literally see food boxes coming off the back of trucks to starving people, and those food boxes have a US flag on them, and they say "Gift of the American people," and that resonates with people. People know where that money, where that food is coming from, and you know. I'm an immigrant to this country, in case you couldn't figure that out already based on the accent. I'm an immigrant to this country. I became a US citizen less than a year ago, and that's a big decision when you come from somewhere else in the world to, put your hand in the air and swear allegiance, not curse, and do all the other sorts of things that you have to go through to become a citizen. But I just want to show you guys something. This is a visibility vest. So this is what our staff wear in refugee camps around the world where they work to identify themselves as CVT staff, right? And on the other side of it is an American flag, because that's where the funding for this project came from. This vest with this American flag, this was the first time I had ever worn anything ever in my life with an American flag on it. And it made me so proud that this country that I had kind of signed up to was doing and supporting this incredible work. Generosity also makes us great, and it also makes us stronger. It's not just a charitable thing. It actually is about the kind of world that we want to live in and the kind of world we want to build together, and in whose side we are on in these things. I've spent my whole life in opposition to dictatorship, to people who commit human rights abuses. And again, I was just so proud to be able to wear this with an American flag on it. And I would hate for that to be snatched away, not just from me or from our staff or from our organization, but from the people who live in those camps, the people who are amongst some of the most desperate and vulnerable people in the world. And that's what they see when people come to help them. I think that's something we should always remember.
Thank you, Simon. We're getting some questions about just kind of the logistics of these stop work orders. So there's a couple things that I'm hoping we can clarify. One is the different funding sources for our programs in the US versus our programs outside of the US. So Emily, do you want to kind of jump in and talk quick about that while Simon gets a drink of water?
Sure. Thanks, Laura. So the stop work orders and what we've been talking about today are all of our programs that are funded by the State Department. So those are all programs outside of the United States. Those are separate and distinct, and they have a different funding source, though it's still federal, from our programs in the United States. And so some of the litigation and things that you've seen probably in the news related to this OMB freeze memo and those types of things, that directly relates to our US-based work. At the moment, the freeze is frozen. That's how I think about it, at least. The judiciary has put a stop to the freeze itself. And so money does continue to go out to organizations, state and local municipalities, et cetera, who receive federal funding in the United States.
Thank you. And I know that we clarified this, but so our programs in the US are unaffected right now, running as usual.
They're operating as usual. We have not received any stop work orders for programs in the United States.
Great. I'm not sure who wants to talk about this, but this waiver process. So, it's been reported that, okay, Emily's going to talk about this. So go ahead.
Yeah, so it's been reported that there's going to be a process of there's two separate things. There's going to be a process for getting waivers to the 90-day suspension. And that is for what the State Department is deeming life-saving care, which we feel strongly CVT falls into that category. We do not have any guidance. We have not received any guidance despite asking multiple times to multiple points of contact from anyone in the State Department about the process for submitting a waiver or the content that needs to be included in the waiver. So that's the waiver. Separately, it has been it's been written that there'll be a program review process, which would take place over the course of the 90-day period, after which program. Despite asking numerous State Department contacts for guidance on the program review process in terms of how we might contribute to that, in terms of the sort of implementation and in terms of the content, and we have received no information about that process.
Thank you. Fun. A lot of people are asking, what can we do? So as a VP of advancement, can you kind of talk about what we are asking people to do and just kind of some bigger opportunities for people to not only support CVT, but people who care about this issue beyond CVT?
Yeah, so on our website, we do have a page where you can take action around advocacy. So if you follow to cvt.org, and we can also start to add that link. And you know, many of you know that last week we launched an emergency campaign, and many people have been very generous. And in fact, I want to come back to that and just talk about that because I want to share something that has happened among there. But you know, so quickly on the sort of on the way to help front. So, you know, we're navigating through the impact of this 90-day funding freeze, and it's arguably the greatest set of unknowns we've ever faced. So, you know we need to shore up support, right, for everyone who cares about this mission. We need to strengthen CVT's position. So as Simon mentioned, we still have programs that are fully operational. We also have expenses and responsibilities that didn't go away just because there was a funding freeze. Expenses like building leases, insurance, technology, and so forth. So, and that this freeze caused a sudden gap of nearly $1.3 million. So over the next 3 months. So I just want to share something kind of extraordinary. And you know, it's a story about all of you who care about this mission. So last week, you know, we launched this emergency campaign, and just after that, we had a donor who stepped forward with a really generous offer. And something interesting about these donors is that they've been supporters of CVT's healing mission for about 10 years, and they've never given a gift this large. But they told us they're horrified at the cruelty with which these funding freezes have been carried out. They're extremely worried about CVT's clients and about CVT's staff. So they decided to do something as they call outrageous. And they hope that it will inspire you and others to do something too. So therefore, they're offering a $100,000 match. They're going to match dollar for dollar every gift we get up to $100,000. And we just wanted you to know about that. Many of you have already given so generously, and we thank you. This community is absolutely inspiring in every direction. There also on our website will be ways, especially for those in Minnesota who may be able to help with volunteerism with our clients in Minnesota, and we're talking to our other programs about ways that people can volunteer. The fact that so many of you are asking how you can help in every direction just means so much. And your care for this mission is absolutely inspiring.
Well, I have you. Well, one of the questions we got is, can we expect foundations and other funding sources to kind of step up um, to make up for this loss of federal funding? Can you kind of talk about that
Yeah,
a little bit?
yeah. So the the quick answer to that is no. Um, it is not really possible for private funders to replace what the US government has been doing and funding. Um, and, we've had a lot of internal conversations about this. As Simon says, like we're in this 90-day period. We're waiting for these reviews. Emily's laid out the context of that. We know that we are probably going to look different. There are so many things that we're doing that we will not be able to replicate what the US government was investing in it, but we can still have an impact. And that will be the work of our organization in partnership with many of you to figure out how we can still have an impact for torture survivors. We know that it will look different without the government by our side. And, many conversations about this. And I think that, Simon, you probably could articulate this better than me, but it's the government's responsibility. This is about stabilizing the globe. This is about human rights and the investment we make around the world in that, as this country that has always led on that issue is about national security. And our government is turning its back on all these ways that those investments really worked. So, in short, no, private foundations will not be able to replace that money. However, private foundations can step up. And we are talking to every donor we have, and many of them are giving more or creating emergency opportunities for us. And we will continue to have all those conversations.
So one thing I just want to say, I just got a note that someone, and it's anonymous, I don't know who it is, just asked if they could add $25,000 to our match. And yes, you certainly can. This There haven't been many positive days lately, and I'm adding this to the things that are making me smile right now. So wow, whoever you are, thank you so much. Simon, we're getting some questions about kind of the bipartisan nature, and you talked about how like torture is not a bipartisan or not a partisan issue, but there was one direct question about is CVT engaging with any Republicans to help push back on this? Can you just kind of talk about our advocacy as a whole and kind of some steps we've taken or expect to take?
Sure. I mean, I'll have to be a little bit careful for obvious reasons, but let me just say that we have a very proud tradition with our policy advocacy team, who not just this past week, but for 40 years have spoken to Democrats, spoken to Republicans, and I mean that at a state level, in all the different states where we operate, at the federal level, and so forth. There's a long, continuous, unbroken line of those relationships. And if we had more time, I think somebody with more knowledge than me could also list the number of governors, congress people, senators, so forth, secretaries of state who have actually visited CVT facilities either here in the United States or in some other place in the world. So we're very, very proud of that. And certainly in the context of the current climate, we are reaching out to everyone we can. Our policy advocacy team is, yes, working with Republicans and Democrats. But if you'll allow me a small editorial comment, I think at the moment there's just a kind of a climate of fear and chaos. And so we need lawmakers to stand with us and stand up for us. Like we need we need senators, we need congress people from Minnesota, from Georgia, from wherever they are in the United States, to stand up and say, leave this organization alone. This organization does great work, or to get on the phone with Marco Rubio. So yeah, again, if any of you have those connections, I'd encourage you to make those phone calls. I'd encourage you to send those emails because again, I have never seen supporting torture survivors as a Democrat issue or a Republican issue or whatever. This is a human rights issue. This is a moral issue. This is an issue about basic human decency and trying to help some of the most vulnerable people on our planet.
Thank you. So this is kind of a clarifying question, but I do think it's important that we answer it. So we're talking about this 1.3 million that we need to get through. But there's a question about what if that money that we're trying to raise is going to do anything to bring back staff that we have furloughed. And this is a really difficult question. But I'm hoping we
I really can't I can't answer that because at the moment it's kind of a day-to-day thing. So as per the instructions that we were given, we've had to furlough a whole bunch of staff. And as this thing kind of plays out, we have to then figure out what the implications of each part of it. As Fawn laid out, that 1.3 is about obligations that we have in order to get through the next 90 days, which we cannot change regardless of a executive order or a memo or whatever. We have to pay those bills. And so that's the gap that we've been left with. What I can say is that, I derived absolutely no pleasure whatsoever from having to oversee the furlough of so many of our extraordinary staff, and I don't want to get emotional but I mean, I've not just here in the United States and people who have had tremendous careers. I've traveled to all these programs. I've sat with these people and shared meals in refugee camps and CVT clinics and offices in literally every single one of our programs around the world. So it is heartbreaking. These are people who are on the front lines and who just do extraordinary, extraordinary work. All I can say is we're looking at if any of that funding is unfrozen, I guess, and if other opportunities arise, we are obviously going to be looking at whatever we can do to try and bring back staff who we value so very, very much.
We're getting a lot of questions about advocacy, and that's one thing I appreciate so much about our community of supporters. So I'm putting in the website, or in the chat, sorry, the website that we have set up with with sample scripts and a link to find your representatives. So at this point, what we are asking people to do is call your representatives and let them know that you are concerned about this and ask them to do everything in their power to help restore funding. So thank you to everyone for wanting to help out in this way. So Simon, can you kind of talk a little bit about how foreign aid, in a sense, is kind of the soft power and kind of the role of international development? CVT obviously plays a part in that, but this is also bigger than CVT. Can you go big with us here?
Okay, we're in danger of entering into first year pol sci classes here and theories about diplomacy and power in the world. But I mean, I showed you this visibility vest, right? Like, I mean, that's a powerful thing that goes out. Again, CVT logo on one side, American flag on the other. I think Emily or somebody mentioned this at another meeting we were at the other day, but I was in Ethiopia at the end of last year and in the capital, Addis Ababa, if you go down, there's a new grand avenue that's been built, bridges and freeway. And all the way along it, there's like a little sign in English, Amharic, and Chinese. And it says, Gift of the People's Republic of China. It's literally the biggest road through the middle of Addis Ababa. That is soft power. Every time somebody drives on that road, every time somebody goes through the capital. And so you have to ask yourself, why is the Chinese Communist Party doing that? What is that about? I think the sad thing here is that for so long, the United States has been the largest donor to international humanitarian aid. It has the money and the power to do the same sorts of things that China does. But it chose to put its money on the table in terms of protecting the vulnerable, in terms of defending human rights. And that's where it chose to spend its money. Keep in mind, by the way, complete common misperception. US foreign aid is less than 1% of the US budget. If you ask, these surveys are always done. Do Americans spend too much on foreign aid? Most people say yes. And they say, well, what percentage do you think it should be? And most people say 5%, 7%. That would represent a massive historic expansion beyond belief of US, foreign aid if that happens. So it's less than 1% of the budget, but it just does so much incredible good in the world because it covers everything from disease eradication to supporting human rights defenders to supporting the kind of work that we do. And Americans are incredibly generous people. I know this as an immigrant to this country myself. But Americans also want to live in a world that is stable and secure and where problems don't come lapping at their shores and there's not chaos around the globe. Well, foreign aid is not just an expression of soft power, it's an investment in, as I said, the better world that most Americans want to live in. Sorry, that was I hope, first year poli-sci intervention is over. I hope I passed. At least I hope I got a C, maybe a B minus.
So questions seem to be slowing down. I know we've kind of thrown a lot of information at people, and we will be following up and continuing to stay in very close contact with you, our supporters, as we continue to go through these dark days. And I know Simon's going to want to close us out, but I also just want to reiterate how much light you all do bring to CVT. And it does really mean more than you probably know. Your well wishes, your support. It means a lot. So thank you for that. Simon, do you want to?
Can I interrupt before Simon ends?
Please.
Sorry. I just want to say we've just received a text message from another donor who's going to give $30,000 to the match.
Wow.
And I just want to say that thank you. I also just want to say this last note. First of all, it's the honor of my life to work at this organization. I'm really fortunate because I've traveled to all of our programs as well, and I've met so many of our clients. And I will tell you, the most resilient people on the planet are torture survivors. And so many of them have written to us and gotten notes to us, to all of us at CVT, to say, look, we've been through a lot. You can get through this. We know you can. So they're sending us messages of support and reminders of being resilient. And I just wanted to share that here.
Thank you for that, Fawn. Look, I don't really know what to say in conclusion other than what I've said already, except, maybe something like this, which is that I would bet anything right now that there are people on this call who voted for President Trump in November. There are people on this call who voted for Kamala Harris. There might even be people who voted for one of the independent candidates. This is not about who you voted for. This is not about, whether you wear a red tie or a blue tie when elections come. This is about who we are as human beings, as I said, in the kind of world we want to live in. And I think like one of the things that's really amazing for me to just kind of follow on from Fawn's point is not just when you travel to places around the world or travel to bloody St. Paul, the suburbs of St. Paul, and you go to the house and you meet survivors there. It's not just the tremendous resilience of these people and how inspirational they are. It's what they then go on to do. So it's the people who you also get to meet sometimes who didn't just come to CVT 5 months ago, but came 5 years ago or came further back and are now doing incredible, they're a doctor in their home country, or they're doing something incredible in the United States of America, or they're involved in their local community, or they're running for elected office. Like we are a bridge for people coming out of some of the worst and most desperate parts of their life to help them get to their new life. And that's why we always say it's not just about a healing, it's about healing and hope. So, I think I will just end with this, and it's not much by way of a speech or anything like that, but the last 18 days have been indescribably hard and filled with sorrow, and you can feel the emotion coming through from various people who have spoken today. But I can absolutely say that 18 days ago, if I got up in the morning and no one rallied around us, nobody kind of really cared, or they thought, yeah, well, it was nice while it lasted, but I guess this is the end of that. I don't know that I would have been able to turn up at work for the last 18 days and do what I've been doing. It is precisely the fact that we have this incredible community of commitment around us. The fact that we have people who are putting money on the table. And again, those incredible gifts, that's remarkable. To me, it's not about whether it's $1 or $1 million. It's like you are investing in us and investing in a future that you want to see. And we will honor that with every ounce of strength that we have. And that's what keeps me going. Because as I said, CVT's not going anywhere. We're going to look different on the other side of this crisis. But we're gonna build out of this. We're gonna keep going. We're gonna be stronger eventually again. So thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. We appreciate you very much, and we'll stay in touch. So thank you all for being here.